Hi guys and welcome back. It's Jason. Today we're talking about the third part of the exposure triangle, the final in the set of videos that I'm doing on this subject. Today we're talking about ISO. So let's see what ISO is all about. In the previous videos, which I will link to down below so that you can watch them in order. They're all part of a playlist and I invite you to watch them all. In the previous videos, we've talked about how your lens is where the light comes in. That's your aperture. Then you have your shutter, which opens and closes the blinds to let the light through your camera window. And where the light lands is your sensor. What ISO is, the sensitivity to light of your sensor. That's where the light finally lands and is interpreted by your camera. The sensitivity to the light of your sensor is controlled by the ISO setting in your camera. A low ISO, let's use 100 for example. What that is it's the base ISO in your camera. This is what you would use outside on a sunny day where you had a lot of light. And remember, capturing light is what we're doing here. So basically, this sets your camera sensor at its least sensitive. What this does is it gives you more dynamic range, it gives you more accurate colors, and it also gives you cleaner images. Now, some of you may ask, why would we ever increase the ISO if it gives us all of that? In some cases, you have to increase the ISO. Say, for example, you have to increase your shutter speed. As we've said in previous videos, the exposure triangle, it all interacts with each other. So if you change one thing, you may have to alter another. So for example, if you're using a faster shutter speed, like we said in the last video, that's opening the window, the blinds, the curtains on your window and closing them. If you have to use a faster shutter speed, that's going to let in less light. So for example, if you have to increase your shutter speed, you may also have to increase your ISO. If, for example, you are taking a picture of a runner and you're trying to catch them as they're going by, you may have to increase your shutter speed to freeze that motion. If it happens to be on a cloudy day, you're probably going to have to increase your ISO. This will introduce some grain, what we call noise, in your digital photo. But depending on how high you go, this is all variable. So it all fluctuates with one another as you make these adjustments. And over time, you will get so that mentally you make these adjustments and you know what you need versus letting the camera do it for you. Now, we just talked about increasing your ISO. What happens if you increase your ISO too far and you already have enough light? What's going to happen is your photo is going to be blown out. In some cases, if you go too far, it's going to be a complete whiteout on your screen and you're just going to ruin your picture. You may overexpose certain areas of your photo because you've got too much light. Again, this comes back into the exposure triangle and factoring in shutter speed, aperture, ISO. They all play in together and you have to get these settings all right. And again, mentally, you're going to be able to make these adjustments eventually, but you just have to practice with these and you will eventually get them so that you know exactly what you're going to need in different situations. Now, some of you may ask, why would I ever take my ISO up to 3200 or 6400 or whatever that may be? Well, for example, imagine that you're taking or trying to take a picture of the Milky Way. If you're trying to do that, in most cases, I'm usually sitting at about 3200. I have my shutter open for 15 or more seconds, and my aperture is as wide open as I can possibly get it. So in a situation like that, you think about it, the only light that is hitting my sensor is a light from stars. And that is a very, very minimal amount of light. But you can almost make it look like daylight if you want with your ISO, your shutter, and your aperture. It just depends on how you control your settings. And you will have a wonderful picture of the Milky Way, but you just have to have your settings right. So that would be an example of why you would have high ISO in a situation like that. Another situation, for example, you may want to do some light painting. So you have to have your ISO set appropriately for that. Whether you're trying to light words in the sky, or you're trying to light an object like a car, or maybe a house, or particular feature on the landscape that you're trying to highlight with a little bit of light painting. That will be a factor of your ISO as well, and your shutter and your aperture, but your ISO will play a key factor in that. So over the past 3 videos, we've talked about the exposure triangle. We've talked about aperture, which controls how much light comes in your camera, like the others, but it also controls your depth of field. We've talked about shutter, which also controls how much light comes into your camera, but it also factors in the capture of movement. And today we talked about ISO, which is also about light, but it is about the sensitivity of light that your camera sensor accepts on it so that you get the right colors in your picture and the right amount of light. So those are the 3 sides of the exposure triangle. And I hope that with these 3 videos, again, linked down below, I hope that you will look at the other videos down below and go through the playlist and learn the 3 sides of the exposure triangle. Remember that each time you up your ISO from, say, for example, 100 to 200, that is what we call a stop of light. So you will hear that referred to. Every time you double, that's a full stop of light. So you want to keep your ISO as low as you possibly can. Depending on what it is you're shooting, you want to keep it as low as you can so that you don't introduce to your photos what we call noise or digital noise. Basically what that is it's like in the old film days you will introduce grain. Now some people use that grain as an artistic creation as part of their photos. They intentionally introduce that as part of their photos. Over time, once you get more experienced using ISO, you'll do that. You'll want to experiment with it and see what looks good to your eye. I hope that I have explained this well for you. And again, I invite you to go down below, click on the other videos, watch through them, and learn more about the exposure triangle. While you're down there, I hope that you will hit the like button, subscribe so you get to know when I make more videos, and I will see you again next time.